Hello, everybody. This is Brian Tonsoni with a special edition of Sports Talk with Tonsoni, where we're interviewing some of the best journalists in the country to ask them some details to help our students become better writers. Tonight, I have from Busting Brackets, Bryan Mauro, who's been on Sports Talk with Tonsoni to talk sports before, and he's been really awesome here to give us some time this evening to help our young writers. Bryan, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, man. How are you?
Great. Thanks for being on. The first question we generally ask everyone is, if you were to talk to a young person who is starting to write sports articles, what do you think is the most important item for them to pay attention to?
First thing I would say is make sure that you do your research. Basically, make sure that you check your reference sites, make sure that you check your facts to make sure that you have everything correct. Because the worst thing you want to do is write something that is not factually correct, because then not only does it make you look bad, it makes the person you're portraying or person you're writing about, you could sell them short potentially, and then all you're going to have to do is end up going back to your editors and going back and correcting things to make it look, to make it correct. So that's the first thing. I know that a lot of times when, at least with me, the people that I'm writing about are people that I'm relatively familiar with anyway. So one thing I also like to do as well is familiarize myself more with them. So, for example, with Busting Brackets right now, I'm doing a series on the most unknown mid-major players that everybody should know about. I've done about 20 of them so far. And the players that I'm writing about are players that, like I said, I know who they are. I've watched them play. But I still familiarize myself with the things that they do. So for example, I just did an article on Martavius McKnight from the SWAC conference, plays for our University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. Now, the SWAC is not a well-known conference at all. It's not a conference that a lot of people get to watch on TV. They are a conference built up of all historical black colleges. They are hemorrhaging money most of the time, so they are not able to compete with a lot of players. However, they do have they do have really good players in that conference. So I wanted to familiarize myself not only with who Martavius was, basically where he came from, how he ended up where he's at, what his numbers really look like when you look at them in depth, and kind of what his future plans are. And basically, I wanted to familiarize myself with the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff to kind of give myself the whole overarching picture there. And once you do that, you can piece together an article fairly easily.
Bryan, how do you go about laying out the organization of a particular article?
So that was the thing that took a lot of kind of finagling and experience to kind of figure out the best way to do that. The one thing you're going to want to do first is you want to always capture your readers. And make sure that the articles that you're writing for. So my whole rule of thumb is that I always try to write for an audience that I'm believing is reading this that has never watched a sporting event in their life. Whether it be basketball or baseball, whatever I'm writing about, I always try to make sure that that person has never watched that sport or has never seen that player play or seen the team play before. So by doing that, the first thing you're going to want to do is introduce the article in a way that's going to capture the reader's attention. Then after that, usually if you do a lot of, introduction, basically you can introduce the conference. For example, with Busting Brackets, you can introduce the conference the player plays in, why the conference is a mid-major, why the conference is not as well known as others. Then introduce the player, things about the player, things about his other teammates, his coach. And then after that, you can kind of go player specific as opposed to, more like, it kind of depends what you're writing, first of all. So I'm focusing on the player because that's what I'm doing right now. Focusing on the team, you could go kind of more team specific. So, team A did this, team A is trying to accomplish this, and then set out your goals that they're trying to accomplish. Or I don't believe that Team A is going to be as good as they were last year. Duke is better than North Carolina for the following reasons. Things like that. Then whatever you type, whatever you put on paper, whatever you put on a computer, whatever you put on a word processor, whatever you put on a blog, anywhere, do it with conviction. Don't second guess yourself. You've done the research. You put in the time to do it. So be confident in what you're trying to put out there.
Ryan, when you go to choose your stories, do you choose them based on what you want to write, or the audience that might be what might get more of an audience, or is it a combination of some of those factors?
It's kind of a combination of both. So you know that when you're writing about basketball, that the articles that are going to get the most hits or the biggest audience are those articles about the powerhouse programs, the Kentucky's, Kansas, North Carolina, Dukes, Gonzagas of the world. Michigan State also is another one that gets a lot of hits, or the ones that have the rabid fan bases like the Nevadas, the UMasses of the world. You know, again, North Carolina, Kansas, Duke, they really all have really good fan bases. Grand Canyon, I've written an article about them. Well, I've toyed with writing an article about them before, but people have written articles about the University of Grand Canyon or Grand Canyon University. They have a large and rabid fan base. They will also get you a lot of hits. Otherwise, a lot of times, though, I'm the one writing it, and I have to be happy with what I'm writing, and I like to write about things that I know. I also like to somehow give myself a challenge, but I do a combination of both. These articles about the top 10 mid-major, the best mid-major players, that was kind of my own thing. I was able to pick who I wanted to write about, and they sort of let me do what I want to do with that one.
So do you have deadlines that you have to meet set by the people you write, or do you have individual deadlines? And then how far back do you usually start to write a story, check it, review it before you send it to your editor?
So with the Busting Brackets site, I am required to continue writing there to do 8 articles a month, which roughly equates to about 2 a week. I'm able to write as much as I want to or as little as I want to, but in order to kind of fit with their guidelines of the things that I need to do in order to be on the staff there, they would like me to write 8 articles a month. With the baseball site, I haven't been as active on that one this year as I've been really active with Busting Brackets because I've been there less time. But the baseball one, I can write as much or as little as I want to. Again, they try to tell me, they try to make sure I write 1 article a week, which I'm pretty good at doing. Let me just kind of say now, after almost 2 years now, and I've gotten a lot better at it, I can write an article depending upon what I'm writing about. If I know a lot about it, depending upon the time I start writing it, I can write an article in about 2 hours. And then I'll sit on it for a couple days, or I'll sit on it for a day, submit it after I proofread it to the editors. When I first started, it was a process. It was about a 3-4 day process. I would do my research and get all of my ducks in a row, and then I would write the article, and then I would sit on it, read it, edit it myself, and then send it on to editing. I've since kind of learned the ropes and learned my limitations of what I can and can't do and what I know and what I don't know. I've gotten a lot better at it. There are still times, though, when I've had to wait to write articles to do some research, a la watching a player on TV, waiting for some stats to update, things like that. Usually when I use the Sports References site, those are pretty real-time updated, so that helps. But that's kind of, usually I can write an article in about 2 hours, but every once in a while I do have to wait a little bit to do it. So, and don't get discouraged if you can't write one that fast. It comes with time. And when I first started, it was a struggle to get an article out in a night. So I usually do 2-3 days before I could get one out. So
we're talking with Bryan Mauro of Busting Brackets and at Red Sox Life. I hope I got that last one correct.
Nope, that's good.
And we're asking him some tips on journalism. Quotes. How often do you use quotes in your work? And how do you handle quotes when you do some research and you see what someone does? Do you reference the article, the author, or should you not use those if they've been in another article? How many do you, if you have a chance to ever interview people, your use of quotes in your articles?
Yeah, so there's a real gray area there when it comes to using something in someone else's articles. The gray area is that if you use something in someone else's articles, you have to cite and cite again, because otherwise they can pop you for plagiarism, because those are their original thoughts, and no writer wants that. So a lot of times if I'm doing research on an article or I see something somewhere that I want to write about, a lot of time I will use that article as a reference point, basically read it, form my opinions, and write about it to where it's my own piece of work. As far as it goes for direct quotes from somebody, I've used direct quotes before, as long as I make sure I cite them. You are also able to paraphrase quotes, but make sure that you cite them as well. I have interviewed coaches and players before. I've also interviewed with baseball. I've done doctors and pathologists, and not pathologists, but physiologists and people that study the human body. And the same thing, I've used their direct quotes. I've also kind of paraphrased what they said in an article. I've never been told for plagiarism before, but just that's a real gray area with some writers as far as quoting a direct article.
Yeah, so if I see that Mookie Betts has a quote on tonight's game and it's online, and I'm writing an article about Boston, can I use that direct quote? Or if I say, according to an article in, the Boston Globe or whatever, Mookie Betts said, or is that, how do you reference that, or is it best not to use that? Because like most of my students probably will not be able to interview Mookie Betts or interview a coach directly.
Right. So my best advice to that is, if you didn't hear it directly from the person, use according to Boston.com or according to the Boston Globe or something like that. If you heard it from them directly, you can use it as a quote. That's just my best kind of advice. I've interviewed coaches and players before, so I've been able to use them. If it's a direct quote in there and you can cite where the direct quote came from, you can use that.
Okay.
So basically, if you're on Boston Globe and you see that Mookie Betts, hit a home run in the 7th inning, and he said, it was a 3-2 pitch, I knew the guy was going to throw me a fastball, that's fine to use. But if it's something from the Boston Globe where they kind of paraphrase a quote and then you use it as your own, that's where plagiarism comes into it. So you can say the quote was from the Boston Globe, but you can use the quote directly. But make sure that wherever you get it from, whatever article you get it from, that you cite the article, so there's just that way you can just kind of avoid full plagiarism.
How does that go when you listen to interviews on the radio and like television? If I'm watching a post and I wanted to write that article, same thing. If I hear it, I can use it.
If you hear it, you can use it. But I also say, usually if I'm writing it, I'll say in an interview with ESPN after the game or something like that. That's kind of the really broad area, but at least you can tell them where. Not just from what someone told you.
What is the most difficult?
Even if it told me or something like that. Sorry.
It's always better to be safe than to leave it out there for someone to potentially claim something, right? So better safe than sorry. Yeah. That's really good stuff, Bryan. I appreciate that. What's the toughest thing for you as a writer that you face even after years of doing this?
The one thing that still bothers me, and it's going to happen to every writer, is the criticism for people when you say their team isn't any good. I mean, I've been personally attacked on social media before. I've been called stupid. I've been called uneducated, all because I told somebody that their team stunk and they weren't going to win very many games. So criticism is the one thing that's still kind of hard to take. I mean, we're all human beings, right? I mean, I let it roll off my back, and I'm not going to change the way I write. But we're all human beings, and that stuff still kind of gets at you. You can't let it bother you, because people are going to form their own opinions on your writing. just think of it this way. If they're criticizing you for your writing, that means they've read it and they understood it and they're having an opinion on it, which is the best thing you can do as a writer. Like as a writer, that's what you want. You want someone to form an opinion on something that you wrote. So whether they like it or didn't like it, that's sort of.
That is tough. I know I've done a little bit of that when our bracketology group won and was on CBS television.
Yeah.
Our guys got some negative social media and everything. And I think the side benefit of that for young people is that, you know, the world that happens when you go out and have a job and do some other things. And when you put yourself out there and have a certain number of hits, a lot of people are either going to read it and have a good opinion or read it and have maybe no opinion. And very few look at it. You got to be able to handle that and move on and not shy away. What do you think is
you won't hear very often the people that have the not the good opinion about it.
Right.
They'll just kind of read it and
What do you think is the biggest mistake writers of any age use, but maybe particular new writers, the biggest mistake they make? And if we share that, maybe our young writers might avoid that or avoid it as much as possible.
I would say the biggest mistake you make is assuming you know more than you know. Right? Like you're like, oh, well, I know everything. I know everything there is to know about Mookie Betts. I'm a huge Red Sox fan. I watch every game. I know everything there is to know about him. I assure you, you don't know everything there is to know about his stat line. You don't know everything there is to know about his analytics. Do research. Because the worst thing you can do, like I said earlier, is put something in writing that is wrong. Because people will let you know about it. Because there's somebody out there that knows about it. And there's somebody out there that's going to check it. And it's whether it's the player or the player's mom or the agent or the whoever, a booster, somebody, whoever's out there that sees that is going to let you know about it. And it's kind of embarrassing when it happens, but it happens.
Brian,
now, there are times too when you'll get criticized for something that you said and you meant to say that's taken completely out of context. And then you have to explain the context and people still may not understand. But like, as long as you say what you're trying to say with conviction. So for example, if you quote a record, okay, we all know that records in sports, especially college basketball, the records before modern college basketball happened in the 50s are kind of irrelevant, right? Like they don't matter because the game was entirely different than it's played now. So if you give a record and you say in the article, these are from 1950 and on or the 50s and on based upon the way basketball is played now, and you say something, but you have the rabid fan base like, no, that's not the real record type thing. Well, it's taken out of context, and you know that the right answer is what they're telling you that it is, but what you're trying to portray in the article is different. So that kind of stuff happens too. But it's one thing to be taken in out of context, be right, as opposed to being completely wrong with the factual information you're trying to say.
We've been listening here to Bryan Mauro with some excellent things. Brian, you have an interesting story on how you got into writing. Would you mind sharing that here as we wrap up tonight's interview?
Sure. So for those of you that don't know, well, I guess none of you probably know, Brian actually does know. I lost my dad about 3 years ago now. My dad always told me that he thinks I should have been a sports writer because I knew everything about it. And my brother was the same way. So my brother kind of got into it before I did, as he was younger and had no other responsibilities besides having just a job basically. So he started writing for a Cubs blog, and I decided to follow suit. And I knew a lot about baseball, so I decided that I would give Red Sox life a shot based on the advice from my dad. I got that job, started writing. And so then I knew a lot about college basketball, and there was just something missing for me. So I decided that I would start writing about college basketball, and I did. And basically the reason that I started writing is because my dad, my late father, told me that he thinks I should write about it. So I kind of wanted to, just to kind of remember him. And so here I am.
And that's a fantastic story. I thank you for for sharing that with our students and sharing that with me previously. Bryan and I have done a few podcasts, and I look to do quite a few more. It is part of the journalism and the sports arena that kind of brought us together. And he's in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm in Indiana. And we've had several conversations. And Bryan, it's an honor to call you a friend, and maybe even a cohort in the sports world. Thank you for taking your time to help students that you've never met. I think that's a great comment on who you are as a person.
And let me say, can I just have one little closing remark here?
Absolutely. It's all yours.
And I'm also my story. So let me just say, I can't speak for everybody that's been interviewed, and I can't speak for what everybody else is going through, but I can tell you this. I did not go to school to be a journalist at all. I didn't really have, I always liked sports, but I never really had any preset things that I really wanted to be a journalist. So don't, because of if you go to college and get your degrees and you don't have a journalism degree, it doesn't matter. I mean, it may matter in the long run, but for what I'm trying to do right now and writing, and I feel that I'm doing pretty well and pretty successfully, I don't have a degree in journalism. Kind of what I'm trying to say there. Like I went to college, I graduated, but I didn't get my degree in journalism. So, and I also this isn't my only job. I do have another job. I have another job outside of the journalism. The journalism is something that I do at nighttime. I do, I really enjoy it. I watch a lot of sports, obviously, but I have a job, and I'm just a normal guy who likes to watch sports, and just, so that's kind of, you don't have to, I pretty much live it, but you don't have to live it in order to be a sports writer. So
thanks again, Bryan, for your time. Very much appreciated. We will be in touch, and this does it for the educational version of Sports Talk with Tonsoni, our third journalist interview of possibly 14. So thanks, students, for listening. We'll see you later.
Thanks, buddy.